Hello, everyone. It's Friday, and you know what that means. It's time for another feedback session. So let's get into it, huh? We have a piece by Maso, and Maso wants to ask about reflections. So the non-metallics. Michael Paints Minis. Thanks for the 11 months. Appreciate you. Golden Kappa train? What? I got to earn a exclusive emote. That's okay. It's like all right. Twitch things. All right, so what I want to say, let's look at this scroll thing going on. It's pretty cool, and I like kind of where you're at, but there is some issues, and the main issue I see is in some of the reflections. You're trying to do this very realistic, like super what you want to call it, super mirrored type armor, right? It's like ultra mirrored, okay? And when you do this sort of thing, you need to think about the distortion that comes from this type of armor, right? So consistency here is very important in these sorts of reflections. And if we look, right, so you can see these sorts of like trees and stuff. This is pretty cool how this works. But if we look here, all right, so I'm gonna draw some of these, right? So there's this tree reflection here. There's a reflection of the lance here in the armor, and then there's this big reflection of the shield and sort of this ground reflection, and the shield kind of continues down here. So the issue is being super consistent, right? You have to be really consistent to make these believable, okay? So one of the issues I see with this is because metal like distorts the image, right? Because the metal has curvature in it. A lot of times, like if hey, guess what? We get to use this as an example. Yeah. Get to use the can. Okay. So let's use the old Red Bull can. Get my phone out of there. So because this is curved, right? You can see it's super reflecting the light. I can put this bottle here off to the side. But look, because this is curved, the bottle reflection is much skinnier than the reflection of the Vallejo bottle. Labels out. Sorry, guys. We get labels out, right? So the reflection is far skinnier, and as you can see, as I move around, it becomes much more distorted. And then, yeah, like a funhouse mirror, like if I dent the can, right, look how it distorts the image, right? Whoa. Yeah. So we need to think about what kind of distortions are happening. Yeah. So, and then like if I do this, right, look how short and wide it is, right? So it's the same width as the bottle, but it's much, much more short and squashed, right? Very squished. Dude, I'm saying, man, I wish they would hit me up, guys. Noble Wizard, thanks for the tier 1, 7 months. Appreciate you. Okay, so you need to be thinking about how the shapes distort. So if we look at this, right? Well, this is coming the lance here is crossing way over into this plane. Whoa, Michael Paints Minis, thanks for gifting a tier 1. Appreciate you. We got a golden kappa or something. I don't know. How do I do that? How do I use the golden kappa? I don't know. Maybe you guys will figure it out. All right, so we could see that it's entering this other side. Well, what that means is that, right? So if we think about this point here, where would this be reflecting in the scene? Yeah, this would be reflecting things that are in front of the helmet, right? This would be like reflecting you and me right now if we were looking at it. Yeah? So this stuff would be reflecting things that are like up above, maybe even the tail or something out here somewhere. Okay? So really the lance needs to stay on this side of the helmet, and it would be very skinny, right? It needs to distort and get skinny because it's a very small area, right? Because we have to get basically a full 360 degrees worth of rotation, reflections within this helmet, right? On just the one half, right? So really, if you think about it, because this would be, the edge would actually be reflecting things behind him, right? That's very hard to paint on a miniature. It's very difficult. It's one of the reasons, like, yeah, you can't make perfect reflections in NMM, right? Because you're simulating, every view you're simulating would be simulating a different reflection. But, right, so that needs to be, it needs to stay on the side of the helmet, right? So if we take this part of the helmet should not be reflecting the lance, and the lance should be more like this, okay? Something like this, maybe. All right, but that also means that the lance, like, why does the lance stop here? Okay, so the lance should still reflect here, even if it's distorted. That might be reflecting this lowest part of the lance, right? And then this would also still be reflecting part of the lance. Okay. Now, this really comes into effect when we start looking at the shield, okay? Because each plane, make another layer. I should have made it. Okay. So each plane of the lance, right, or the chest, this stuff is facing upwards. This is also facing upwards. So even though, and this is starting to face downwards, right? This is a cylinder here. So this part of the leg would be reflecting things that are coming in from this direction, right? So this part of the leg here would not reflect the shield. The shield should stay on this half of the leg, right? And it distorts and lengthens. Same with this here, if this was reflecting, right? Okay, so even if this part of the chest, right, was reflecting the back of the shield, well, it's going to shrink as it starts to change, because the higher up part is reflecting things that are above him. Okay, this is also reflecting something that's above him, which means this here is the same angle as this is up here, right? So this tree wouldn't really reflect on top of his shoulder like this. In fact, this here would probably be reflecting things that are behind him, like his tail. Okay, So this is why it's very difficult to pull off this. And one of the reasons I don't love painting reflections of things that are on the model, because this also only works when looking at it from one very specific direction. Open the chest. Oh, it's only for 24 hours? Oh. Wow, cool. Right, so you have to think about like where this stuff is going to change, okay? All right, now that said, right, if we want to try and pull this off, obviously this stuff here is facing upwards, so we're not going to get, oops, go to the other layer, right? We're not going to get as much of the shield up here, right? The shield probably needs to move over some. So if we're going to grab this, right, maybe the shield's more like this, and then does something like, I don't know, this, right? And it's going to get all weird and wavy and distorty because it's yeah, that's just how these things work, right? This reflection here probably needs to be a little higher to match the way the reflection is here. So this reflection here might actually be somewhere more in here, right? So these, just being consistent with your placement matters a lot. All right, so if the shield, if this is reflecting the shield in the chest, what's on the other side of the shield? Well, based on the helmet, it looks like there's like green plants and stuff on the other side of the shield, you know? And the back of the shield is this value. So that means that the back of the shield, if we're painting a reflection of the back of the shield and it's in shadow, then probably the reflection of the back of the shield should be much darker, right? And then because this changes, right, this is not reflecting the shield because this is reflecting things that are above. So here we're reflecting more sky. Right, so some crazy stuff is going to happen in here where you get all this distortion and warping to this shape. As the back of the shield reflects in that. Does that make sense to you guys? Like, that you have to consider, like, yeah, what's on the other side of the shield? Like, what are we trying to simulate here? That means that, like, the green, all these green tree reflections need to be on, like, this part of his shoulder. But that means this part up here is more bluish, so we don't really, right? This needs to match the helmet, like, up here. Yeah, I mean, my general opinion is probably to avoid these sorts of effects too much because or like if you're going to do it, right, you can do it, but what happened to my tools? That was weird. I don't know how I did that, right? Sometimes it's better to distort the armor more. Like, don't try and make it perfectly polished. Because if you make it too polished, then it's, yeah, you're trying to paint a mirror. So often what I would consider is instead to just make it like a bit noisier, right? Like you can give the impression that there's something dark reflecting here, but instead of making it like perfectly obvious, like blur that out, right? And like, wouldn't his arm reflect in this? You know? So creating instead just the impression that something's reflecting in his body. Complicated between the sky, ground, and shield. Yeah, well, not just the sky, the horizon also, right? Like there's assuming that this is in some kind of forest, right? If you want to simulate a forest, right, you can do that. But instead of like trying to like draw a forest, think about like how the forest is going to create these like trees, right? And you can create these shapes that give the impression of trees, right? Without having to try and literally draw a tree, right? You can create like it's more about like the sensation, right? Of some sort of trees and reflecting in his armor. Okay. Even this, like, okay, well, the sun's coming in from this direction, so shouldn't the back of these, like, technically speaking, like, these should be really reflecting, like, the shadow side of trees, because the sun is coming in from that direction. And then you can play with all these green grays. Because basically what's happening is you're taking all these colors and those colors begin to like blur together, right? As the armor becomes less shiny, right? It's like you're squinting at the reflection of the armor or the reflection of the environment, right? So it's not a perfectly clear reflection. It's a blurred reflection as it starts to reflect in like the different the slightly rougher version of the metal, right? Thunderbuckus, hello. Right? And like maybe there's the impression of a tree here, and you can get, these like slightly noisier, right, sort of tones. Okay, but then that means all of these, like there should be some sort of trees like in his legs and everything else. This is why this is, very, very, very hard to pull off like exactly, right? And it's never going to work from like every angle. But you can try and make it work from more angles by like blurring it and giving instead, that simulated sort of effect where you're like, okay, I can imagine that those are pine trees or whatever, right? Feedback is for subs. Send spoods. Spoods. Right. So does this make clear to you guys? Does this make sense? Why this effect is right? And then you can soften it a little bit where you need, where it's like maybe a little more blue. Okay. You create this sort of simulation of a reflection instead of a mirror. Even here, like if you wanted to reflect, like technically on the leg, like this should be like the same as this, right? Because this is what this part of his leg would be reflecting, right? This is all, it would be reflecting this stuff right here, you know? Sin Boots, thanks for the tier 1. Exclamation point Discord. You can join the Discord, and then you can link your Discord to your Twitch account. Thank you for the tier 1. All right. Cool. Makes sense. That's enough talking about NMM. Thanks, Mose. I like the color of the fabric. All right. Okay. So that was a Maso. Let's go to Nay. Nay has also posted updated photos. So are those the most recent ones? Yes. All right. Oh, this is interesting. So we'll take a look at this. Okay. Hi, Ron Whidden. Thanks. Okay, so Ron here, or not Ron, what was this? Sorry, I just got confused. Nay. All right, Nay says, hi, Glassade. Friday, you said I could update the entry. I like the new cape more, but I still have something ain't right with it, and I'm afraid that our cloth on head doesn't really have any volume. Okay. Another thing I've been struggling with is how to go about the shadows on the back. Yes. All right. So the front of the model I quite like. There's some really nice color in here. There's some nice going for this sort of like desert, almost. It's this like warm sort of effect, right? This not quite sunset, but there's clearly like this warm vibe to it. So if you want to really pull off this look, right, this sort of effect. So the interesting thing here is that you've done chrome, right? This sort of like super shiny, the super shiny chrome look. Yeah. And you've pulled, but so you've got this like ambience and stuff in these warm tones in like the skull and in the skin and kind of in the like fabric. But then what happens here? Like you did all these warm colors in this metal, but then this metal is just like gray blue, right? It's just gray blue. So where do the warm colors go in there? You know? So what we want to do is we need to introduce some of that warmth into these metals also, right? So let's do something like this where we're going to change the color mode. And we're just going to think about like, yeah, so some of this metal should also, even if it's beat up and rough, like it doesn't have to be as much, but this would still have some coloration to it, right? It wouldn't really be so bluish. It would start to shift like these warmer colors. So you can use the warm tones in here to start to create some of that feel, that maintain that deserty feeling throughout, right? And like there should be these sorts of colors, right? So yeah, it doesn't, you can go generally darker. But you have to make sure that you at least have some of that, some of these tones, right? will help make this consistent with the other metal, right? So you can see they're two clearly different metals, but at least it picks up some of the color tones that are in the other metallic, right? So we're just trying to be consistent with that. Sinspood's ! Discord, or you can grab the link, like it should be right underneath in Twitch to get a link to the Discord. So, right now, the next thing, if you guys want to pull off this look, okay, this like really warm sort of look, okay, I'm gonna make a new layer. You gotta start, the trick really is in the transition, right? So where is it color? No, I want not color dodge. I want like color burn. There we go. So it's all about the transition, right? So it's where that the light starts to stop and the shadow starts to begin. That's what you're really gonna get that super warmth to everything. So it's like, where does the shadows begin? So like here on the hood, right? I can increase that warmth, a little bit of that orange, like right at the transition mark, right? So I can do this on like the skulls. Okay, you want to do it basically on everything. You just want like right at the change to have more of that warmth. So like here on the robes, even on the cloth here, you want just that bit of orange right before it turns to shadow. And it makes it so much more feel like that deserty kind of, or sunset-y kind of effect. All right. And that's on everything. So everything should shift a little bit more orange right as it starts to change to shadow. And that also means that everything as it's in lights, that includes like the leather and everything else, should have a bit more yellow in it just as it gets to the highlight, right? So your leather here is like a little too desaturated for the kind of vibe that you're going for. Right? So that's sort of the idea. Now, the other idea, right? The other idea is like, how do we transition to the shadows? So if we look at the side, you can really see that everything kind of just becomes sort of the same on the back. So I'm not going to do much to this view, but let's go to the other view. I just wanted to show that view. Let's look at the back. All right. It's not gray back here, right? So now when we look at this, there's just not enough to inform us, right? Let's go back to this one. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at this in terms of values. All right. So on this one here, we can see that certain elements, right? The skin, the bandages, the hat, the skulls, right? They're just lighter, right? They're just generally lighter, which is a good thing, okay? But the problem then comes, if we look at the back of this one and we do the same thing, what happens? What's the problem, Nay? It's all the same, right? So nothing on the back side is brighter, right? So we have to create, you know, we gotta use something that tells us, right, that this certain parts of this are just lighter than others, right? Okay, that means that the skulls, for example, even if it doesn't matter, like if you want to use blue or whatever, I mean, I could use gray here to just increase the value, right? That means that the skulls need to be lighter. That means that the hat needs to be lighter. You also don't have to remove this much color from it, okay? Like, removing this much color, you can still use, like, go outside and stand in the shadows, right? You still have color in things. It's just maybe not as obvious as it is when you're in like pure daylight, right? And metal, like, there's still going to be the sky on this side, right? So I mean, like, from this direction, this metal is still going to have, like, the sky and the ground reflecting in it, you know? It's just everything is toned back and maybe slightly more desaturated than just straight up, like, you know, I can use these sorts of these medium tans, right? To say, like, yep, this is a skull. We still know it's a skull. It's just not as bright as it is in the front. This thing's still white. Whatever. Like, I have no idea what the rucksack is supposed to be. Right? Is the rucksack supposed to be like a khaki? Okay, well, sure. I can still do a khaki. Right? It's very dark, right? I could still represent this as a khaki and show that it's darker than, you know, the very dark brown that we might have you know, in the leather, right? So this is still supposed to be leather. It should be brown. It might be more desaturated brown, but it still needs to be brown. Hi, stick legs. Is it ever visible to do that on purpose? And how would you convey that? It was such, I'm sorry, is what viable? Then, right, after you've done that, now you can start thinking about, like, okay, there's no sky reflections on the back here, but you might get softer, like, blue reflections of the sky, right? So these sort of ultramarine values, to have the values so close. Yeah, I mean, no, like, you don't want them to be, like, literally, like, you don't want them to be, yeah, quite so obvious, right? Like, you need to create some distinction. This is kind of what I was getting into with, like, the tenebrism conversation we had, like, the other week, right? Because it's like, if everything's just the same, there's no, like, visual distinction between it. Okay, so yeah, you can push some of these, like, ultramarine, sort of lights into the skulls to say, like, yeah, this is reflecting. There's maybe some bluish reflections in this stuff. Maybe the leather begins to reflect some of the blue which is going to like turn it gray. This looks blue, right? Like you could see that this is blue, but if I grab it, like I color pick it, you can see it's not actually like it's really like gray, right? Okay. Now you can see, and then you can add more shadows, like everything would get deeper shadows and stuff, like all the occlusion shadows and whatnot. If you want to see this in effect really well, go look at Maxime Pinot's Ogre that he did at Monte. It's the Aquilari Ogre land skirt. You can see these like blue reflections that he put in the shadow side. And they're super effective to show that, like, yes, the sky basically becomes another light source in the back. So you get reflections of that, but they're much softer. Do value hierarchies that exist in the front, like the skull and poles, they are on remain constant on the shadow side? Meaning, like, if the pole is higher value than the skull in front, it should stay that true in the back as well? Yes. Yes, you have to shift. It's all about relativity, right? So when values shift, right, they need to shift the same, right? Like, until you get into what I would call like negative values, okay? So you have imagine there's a value scale, right? Let's go back to the, what's it called, right? Imagine there's a value scale, okay? And that value scale goes from, I'm going to just do this real quick. Maximum limit 6 layers. When did that become a thing? Okay. So imagine you have a value scale. That's all black right now. But then we can, we can create another value scale here. Right, so that value scale goes from black to basically pure white, right? But in reality, that's only what your eyes can see, because you can okay, so like this is 0 here, 0. Maybe use a color that I can see more. Okay, if this is 0 and this is 10 up here, you can't see. Take pictures on black or white gray backgrounds, guys. All right, so 0 and 10, right? Because white hit right here and black hit right here. Well, in reality, you have like -1, -2, -3. There exist blacks that are darker than black. In reality, your eyes will adjust, right? If you look into somewhere that is dark, your eye will adjust to see more of the information that's in there. We can't paint in high dynamic range like our eyes can adjust to things, right? But there's more information in the blacks than that. So that means that whites is the same, right? It goes 11, 12, 13, etc., right? It goes beyond black and beyond white. So something, let's say there's something neutral like this, something neutral, and it's at like a 3 and a 7. Okay, so the light is at a 7, the shadows are at a 3. Okay, well, say something's light, it's the darker material, right? There's a difference in here of 4, right? That means if something's brightest part is a 3, that it really goes 3 to -1, right? So the blacks might start to take over more. In something that's, you know, pure white, maybe it goes from, right? If its darkest color is a 7, what happens when we add 4? It goes up to an 11, right? So if the whites are whiter than white, right? So in a sense, yes, the value relativity stays the same in the lights and the shadows, but sometimes you don't have that range of values to work into. So something that's like dark gray and something that's like slightly lighter gray, but still quite dark, they might have the same black shadows, you know, because you can't go any more black, right? Does that make sense? Good. Ansel Neo. Hi, Eric. Followed along with yours and Mark's tutorial on this subject, and I think it came out pretty good. Would like to make, I would like some feedback on what to improve and the general focus areas to improve my painting game. Okay. So, it's not bad. It's okay. I think the thing I'm seeing, the thing that stands out to me the most, right? Like I like the, I can see where you kind of followed the along with like the belt and stuff. Feels familiar, right? And I think some of the volume interpretation's pretty good. The thing I'm seeing is in terms of color, right? If we look at this from further back, does anybody else feel like the face is really washed out? Anybody see that? Like how gray the face becomes? So what's happening, and this can happen quite often. Okay. So you're losing, there's a tendency when we start to highlight, right, and we're pushing the values, that we start to lose some of the midtones, right? Because you're so interested in the contrast between light and shadows that you start to lose some of these values, like these tones, right? So there's all this like warmth and more intense colors, okay, that happen because you're working so much refinement in the face. You start to lose some of these sorts of colors. So what we have to do, right, we need to come back with some of these, right, and we need to start to introduce some of them back. So as like a glaze, you come back with these midtones, these more saturated tones, right? And you come back and you start to filter these back in, and we're going to add that life back into the skin by reintroducing some of these values and stuff that were lost, right? Okay, so things like this, you know. We reintroduce this stuff, and that'll get us much closer to like a more natural skin tone. Okay, And another thing I see some of these like warm yellowy colors, right? These are much more intense in terms of color, so we can use some of those too. So try and like, it could be easy to like overdo it and you use too much white and then you start to lose the feeling like the color in here because you're trying to push the highlights so much. So filter it back, right? Get that color back in there, get that color in the skin. Okay. Like on the forehead here. We can bring that color back. And then if we need, then we can come back and create a new layer and we can push those highlights back in, right? So it's like now that we've done that, we can reintroduce some of those highlights, right? All right, I'm going to overdo it, and then I'm going to like reduce the value, right? So here, you know, you might have a highlight here, you might have highlights on the forehead, you know, so I'm going to exaggerate a little to show. Okay, so I'm really pushing the light. And then I can tone that back, right? It's like I reduce that a little bit. Okay? So we can see the difference here is like, look just how much more life there is in the skin by, you know, filtering that color back in. All right? Next thing is probably just need to like focus on some cleanup, right? There's some elements that are a little rough, all right? What I mean is, yeah, you need some areas where like there's real shadow in here, you know? Like we need to create some distinction, some definition in here, like in the nostrils and stuff. There should be quite dark shadows in here. The mouth. Okay, like more of his armpit. Like you could see in the photograph just how dark this is right here because of the photography, not because of the painting. So we want to try and yeah, make sure that those areas are nice and shadowed, right? Like make sure that there's like showing where his belt line is and stuff. Okay. And yeah, you're getting a little, so like there's parts that are quite rendered and then there's some parts that are quite sketchy. So just try and think about this stuff. And like you need to be consistent with the placement of the highlights here. So if the highlight is on like the chest, it's in the center, it's more in the center here, right? It's here, right? You might not even get one there, but yeah, maybe you get some on his neck. There's this one like in the center of his chest, so that one kind of matches this one. And then maybe some of these areas get some highlights too. Okay, there's probably would be more highlight like on his arm. With him being in a fight, could you just glaze some red into the forehead and cheeks a little? I mean, that's basically what we're doing, like just glazing in some color, right? I'm not trying to make him look like, you know, he's covered in blood or anything, but you can make him like a little more flush if he's been sweating, you know? All right, so let's look at how those highlights kind of change his skin, right? Okay. And the same can be done with metallics. Like we can make shinier parts to the metallics here. Right, some of the you want some areas that are like really catching the light, you know? Like don't be afraid to really push the light in a couple spots. Right? You want it to, if you want it to look shiny, you really gotta create some spots of shine for it, you know? Like look at the difference now on the belt by just adding that little bit of shine there, right? Makes it more reflective. Okay. Makes sense. I hope so. It's pretty cool. I think it's on the right track. Just yeah. Spend a little bit more time, push the highlights a little bit, glaze in some color. Yeah, don't lose the coloration. And then should be pretty good. What's going on? Yeah. All right. Koku? Hi, Eric. I need general feedback on this lady. I struggle a bit with dark skin tone, as this is the first time I've done this. Okay. So to me, it looks pretty good. I think the colors and stuff are quite nice. I think, yeah, I think honestly the coloration of the skin is pretty good. It's got some of these like nice, really saturated reddish browns, right? So that's good. And then you've got some of these more. You could probably go like a little more orange with it. It's maybe like a little too pinky feeling, right? You're very in these reds, but you can still use like some oranges and stuff. So what I'm going to do is just alter the color here. So instead of going so pink, like maybe make it like a little more orangish in the lights. You're over defining her stomach here. Like yeah, it is very defined in the sculpt. But I think you might be overdoing it a little. So I would tone this back and maybe try and like soften it out some. So it's just not so. It's just not quite that much, right? Like, So she's not like bodybuilder levels of definition here. Okay, something like that. Now, don't always put the highlights like so high up. Like try and stress this quite a bit, but like you don't need the highlights like all the way on top of things. Like this highlight up here and this highlight like on the collarbone, like all the way on top. Not really where you would expect to see highlights, right? You can see in the photo that the highlight is kind of showing up here. So this is very dependent on what your the viewing angle is, right? But try and always bring the highlights a little more forward, okay? Because realistically, she would actually have, you can sort of see it in the photo that like highlights start to show up in here in places, right? There's a look, there's a little highlight kind of popping in right here from the lamp. So you can create things like that, and then let's tone some of this back so it's not so sharp. Like this also ends up often making things look way too sharp when you put them like on the ridges. We're not trying to, these aren't edge highlights, all right? Trying to be a little more natural, try and make things a little more organic, okay? So I'll try and avoid too much of these like edge highlighting of things, okay? Could you get like a really bright purple? So the purple tones that you see in like African skin tones, the purple tones you're seeing is blue, right? It's you only see them in shadows. Typically where the skin is reflecting the sky instead, right? So if their skin's reflecting the sun, the lights tend to go more warm and orange. The purplish tones that you often see in very dark skin tones is from the sky, right? So if I take like a sky blue here, this is like a sky ultramarine blue, right? And I do an add, and we add some reflections of the sky. This is the same thing we were talking about earlier with like the bluish tones in the back. Look what happens to the skin as it starts to reflect some blue in it, right? Because there's a lot of red. This is from DeoGuard 2. I did the box art for this model, actually. Right, so if we add some of that blue, look what color it changes. So if this was, that's why you often see this is why you often see these like purplish tones in really dark skin tones, is because it's the skin reflecting, it's the skin reflecting the sky in the shadows. Okay? Make sense? Or cold light, right? I'm not saying do this, I was just using it as an example. Okay. How long have we been going? A little over an hour. All right. I'm going to take a quick break before we look at Goopy Man here. Mr. Crab Claw. And yeah, then we'll get back to it. So, be right back. Hello. Eric, what do you think about the remaining parts? Now, let me go back and look at it real quick. I think the other parts are quite good. I like the gold a lot. I like the gemstone. Could maybe use a little more contrast on the feathers, but the metallics are good. This is not good. Where's the gold on the edge? Huh? This looks lazy. But yeah, pretty nice. All right. Nurgly Man. Pretty cool. This guy is so popular. Holy bejesus, this model is popular. I think it's pretty nice what you got going on. I think there's some issue. I'm not painting this model. I like the idea of the glow effect here. It's pretty cool. Right, this, and then it's kind of like glowing on some of these parts down here. Right, this is neat. But I have the issue that it sort of just stops here. And none of this yellow light kind of really shows up down here. Right? So let's fix that a little. Okay? So we've got this glow. This like bluish glow. Yeah. Showing up on the bottom. And that is going to increase the light on some of this stuff, which is cool, right? But it needs to show up a little more on some parts, right? Where it reflects on the armor a little more. Okay. A little better edge definition here. Okay. But it'll also like reflect in some of these sorts of elements. So a little more on the knee down here, right? Maybe even show up a little bit on the hands. Not very much, but a little. Okay. And then don't cut the, like, this should be like yellow, okay? So because this is facing upwards, like some of the yellow light just cuts off too soon, okay? So we need some more yellow light that shows up in some of these parts, right? It shouldn't just like switch from one to the other. The two light sources will interact a little bit, and we'll get a bit of both, right? And then like, yeah, there's still needs to be like these dark reds. Okay, there's going to be some of these dark reds down here too. Right? maybe a little bit of this blue shows up on like the bottom of this thing. Okay, so it's important to get both of those, right? Oh, there's gonna be like 30 of this guy at GD, I guarantee it. Okay, I really like the like bright yellow here. I think you could push a little more. Right, you got this like final bright yellow light, especially like defining some of the shape of the symbol. In fact, I would probably alter the symbol in some way, maybe like paint it copper or something to break it up a little bit. But it's not bad. But just increasing some of the edge definition here where you can. This is a little weird to me where it just like changes from one to the other. I think I would try and like make that transition a little softer so it's not just like from one straight to the other. So like if you want to do something like that, like you either need to have the transition be like immediate where it's like a patterned transition and it's changing, or create a bit of a softer transition, all right? And you can even like add some of that skin tone like a little lower than what you got. Now, let's do the thing real quick because I just want to look. I think generally the values seem to be quite nice, but it could be a little more, right? You can sort of see here that some elements start to like blend together a little bit. So I think there is a little bit of an opportunity to choose some elements to be like a bit more obvious, right? We're doing decent color separation, like there's good color contrast to separate elements, but I think we could create like a little more differentiation here. Like if you want the horns to be dark, right, that and then they split out to a lighter tone, like don't be afraid to go even a bit darker on them, so they're really like clear that they're yeah, this darker hue or this darker value next to the helmet. You know, we can darken some of this down a little more, give a little more volume to it. Creating just a little, just separation and stuff where we can to create that higher definition, right? Like maybe this handle should be even darker in order to separate it from the hand and the axe even more. And then you'd go back and you'd add little highlights to it and stuff to create the definition on the wraps, but lowering the overall value more just to create more shape. Now, if it was me, I would probably change like some of these elements to a different effect, like maybe doing something like you know, maybe make this brass or copper Maybe make this whole thing copper. Right. Something to just make a little more just separation here. Should metal usually have more of a higher value compared to other things due to reflectivity, or just depends on the metal? It depends on the metal and it depends on the lighting, right? Depends on the light source. Right? So if we change this, it makes this shape like more defined, right? And then obviously, because it's brass, you have to, or because it's copper, you've got to create, if it's in MM, you got to, make it shinier and stuff. But just an idea, right? So you can see one of those two, right? One gets kind of lost, the other sort of separates out. And this, like, it seems like a small thing, but it can help, again, further separate elements. Like maybe you don't want it that dark, maybe you want it something like 50% of that, but creates more clear separation. The big one, I think, is the glow. Like this, getting this glow right, and then getting some of that green light showing up on the base, or some of that more yellowish light on the lower parts of the figure, so that it's the two lights interact more naturally together. Ali Rojo, hello. I guess I missed Cardiac Soul also, and Space Tada. Sorry if I missed you guys. Hello everyone. Okay, makes sense. Cool. Alright, don't know if you do this, but I really appreciate if you have time to give some feedback on the finished piece. It's been submitted to Squidmar Open in standard diorama. I mean, I know I already looked at this. At least I looked at the lady. So I don't want to sit here and do like too much drawing over top of it. I think it looks pretty good. Big thing to me is like there's some elements here. Like I like that the white hair and the feathers, like some of the, like the quiver could probably use some more definition. It becomes sort of samey, right? Like making sure the feathers and stuff are a little more defined, so it's not all just like looks like just wood. Because right now it looks like carved wooden fletching, right? Instead of like the wooden shaft with feather fletching. So there's some stuff like that. The non-metallic, pretty cool. I particularly do like the shield. Seems quite nice. The really bright highlight here on the shield seems very cool. Yeah, I think overall it came out quite good. Could probably use like a little more definition in some spots and a little less in others, right? Like I'll show you real fast, just on one particular spot. So something like on the fur, for example. Okay, we can create a bit of a softer fur here by not going quite so dark in all the recesses, right? You don't have to go that dark in the shadows of the fur, right? So by lifting everything a little more, we're going to create more separation, right? we're going to create a further separated shape of this fur. Okay, so let's look at the difference real quick. Just how much this is going to, like, you know, create that shape more, right? So that stuff's maybe a little too dark. And then something like this sort of leather parts here. You know, it's a lot of brown, but you could probably outline some of this stuff a little bit more, right? Like really try and separate some of these shapes a little more, so the details of these leather parts are more obvious, right? So using these darker lines here will create more separation. CW, thanks for the prime. Appreciate it. All right, and then you can, you know, all this stuff can be cleaned up and defined a little bit better. Sharpness is definitely a thing here. Like you might want some of these elements to be just as sharp as like the metallic is, right? You got all these like weaving parts. So creating some sharper edge details will create more clarity in this, define these edges more. You see the difference between the stomach weave and the arm, right? You see how much more like defined that is compared to the arm now? The arm almost looks sort of blurry, where the stomach is like super clearly defined. Okay. Like there's no definition down here. Anyways, I think you get the idea. Right? So, sometimes we want less shadow to make things softer. Sometimes we want more shadow, more edge highlights to make things more sharp and defined. It depends on what kind of material we're talking about, right? And just how, like, are we trying to create more individual pieces? Or are we trying to create larger pieces? So thinking about the material and thinking about how sharp you want it to be can do a lot for changing the design. I like these leather belts and stuff. They look good. Yeah. But cool. All right. Makes sense. I hope so. Very good. Brush Master. Hi, Eric. Can you please give me a model? You said in the original post it would be good to see more colors in it. Yes, it would. Okay. So, I'm not going to do a crazy paint over, but here's what I mean. So, let's talk about this guy real quick. So, let's look at the sword. the sword is very interesting. Yeah, we've got all this different coloration in the sword. Let's look at, we got this sort of like a greenish color in here. We've got these more blues, right? We got these like reddish tones. Okay. Right. You got like more neutral grays and blacks. So there's like multiple different of these sort of pastel-y colors in here, but we're playing around with color variation. Now let's look at the blue armor. Blue. It's blue, purpley blue, blue, blue. Okay, how about the red? Red, like pinkish, more pink, pink. All right, how about the green? Green, 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 right? Green. So it's just very linear when you compare it to like what's going on up here, right? So what we want to think about is like, okay, you're doing that sort of stuff, right? You're doing some cool stuff here. Well, the chains are metal also, right? They're steel. So where are these tones? Where are these colors in the chains, right? Let's do this real quick. Let's darken the chains. Let's just lower the value. Okay. Well, you've got this, and then we'll pick this. Yeah. So you got these like interesting kind of colors like this. And then you got these sort of like bluish tones. All right, and then we can even maybe introduce some like yellowish tones. Right, so which chain is more interesting to you guys? This chain or this chain over here? Right, and the same with the like the blue armor, right? Like, why can't we use some of this yellow, more warmish tones in the blue, right? So like instead of this, I'll shift it like this, right? Okay, you're using this kind of like warmish tone in the bottom. So instead of just this, what if we went like, what if we go crazy and go something like this down here, right? So we have, right? It adds this like color variation, you know? Okay, instead of this, right? Let's go like, this. It still reads as green. I'm not even green now. I'm straight up yellow. Right? Okay, and instead of just dark green shadows, let's go maybe some teal shadows, right? It's a little more saturated also, you know? So we create this like color variation in here that's going to add way more. It just stops your colors from being like so linear, you know? It creates a much more appealing sort of color palette that varies a lot more, right? Oh, this is just like gray, you know? Well, okay, instead of this being just like gray, like what if it's like this, right? Okay, now we shift from like this sort of reddish tone to a more yellowish kind of color for the lights, right? Although I would work this as I go. I wouldn't just glaze at this point. This is more from like a fundamental approach, right? So this is even more like early stage stuff. Like while you're layering, I would add, you know, yellow to the mixture or whatever as I go, and you'll create more exciting colors as you work, right? All right, cool. Because this I really like. Yeah, the steel blade is really cool. And then the other parts, you know, they lack. So you'll get it. Just be more bold with your color choices. Don't think like when you're picking a armor, like don't just be like, okay, it's going to be blue. Well, like, sure, the main color can be blue, but how can you vary that blue to make it more interesting? You know. Fallen shots. Working on skin tones. Hi Eric, this is my first time mixing skin tones myself, and would after we had the discussion on stream. So just looking forward feedback on skin and how I can improve it. So the colors of the skin tone appear quite good. It's not about, yeah, it's just adding, it's about adding variation. It's not about like, oh, you have to add. An easy trick is to make the shadows cooler and the lights warmer, because that's often what we're used to seeing because of the way the sky and the sun works. But you can do it the other way around too. You could use more warm shadows and more cold highlights. It's sort of up to you what kind of ambience and effect you want to get, but varying the color will make for a more interesting painting, and not everything will feel so like color booky, you know, where you're just like, oh, I'm gonna color this part in this blue and I'm gonna color this part in this green, right? You play around with the colors. So the skin here is I mean, the color, like the colors are fine, right? The skin tones are quite good, you know? Like I don't have any issues with like the matching of color. What I see is like there's like a serious lack of definition and form. One, I think this bust is not great. I do not like this bust at all. No, it doesn't give you a lot of opportunity for like interesting shapes at all. So the issue I have is there's like no sense of like light direction at all at the moment. Like where is the light coming from? Is it just like straight down? If it's straight down, then like you need to think more about like, okay, if the light's coming straight down, and you got this sort of like these darker shadows over here. Well, doesn't that mean like the whole side of his face would be in shadow? Okay, is the light coming in from this way? So when I'm picking a lighting direction, all right, when I'm choosing how I want to light my figure, right? What I'm looking for ways that can make this, that can accentuate the shape and the form of the figure. So which of these two is going to make for a more interesting light, do you think? Coming from the top right or coming from the top left? And why? Tell me, chat. I'm going to read your answers on stream. Pepper Sanders, thanks for following. Just say right or left. Here, in case you guys don't know your rights from your lefts. Why would you... So, top left, shadows on the opposite side. Well, shadows are always on the opposite side. The left will show more of the face. Left because of the head angle. Yeah. So, if we choose top right, yeah, where do we really get shadows on the face? Basically, just under the nose and under the eyebrows, right? That doesn't really express to us the overall shape very well. Where if we choose top left, yeah, now we get shadow under the nose, we get shadow on the side of the head, right? So this is going to express the shape of the head much more than if we went just from the top right. Okay? Also going to give more form and volume to the beard. Okay? Yeah? So we're trying to express the form of the head. So choosing the top left will allow us to do that more. All right? So, well, we got to push this contrast a little more. I don't know if this is just from what's it called? Because your paint looks very glossy at the moment. So let's grab a color like this, right? We go a little darker, slightly more reddish. Yeah, something along these lines. Okay, so let's draw in the shape of the face. Right? So if we bring in the light from the top left, that allows me to create some shadows like this. Right? I'm not even worried about like midtones at the moment. I'm just worried about like general shape, right? Create some shadow under from his eye socket there. Create the shadow of the nasal labial fold. Yeah. And he'd probably have quite a bit of shadow, like from a cast shadow or something. Then we could also create some shadow of the shoulder. Right. Some shadow of the chest. Okay. So then when we start to blend it together, also, dude, you gotta have these, like, you need these shadows, like, from the eyelid and stuff that are gonna create, you know, definition in these parts. Okay. Because we're losing some of the definition of, like, the eyes and stuff. Okay. You happen to have even more shadow, like here. All right. So let's blend these two together a little bit. Let's take something in between, some sort of neutral skin tone, and we can blend this out a little bit, right? Some color like this that you've used. Yeah. So we blend this a little bit and we soften this shape. We don't have to soften it very much. Because that transition is going to be pretty harsh. Okay, and then we need, like, details, right? So this isn't perfectly blended, but let's look at the difference in, like, shape of the face, right? Like, one of these really shows, like, the form of the head. Okay. So considering the light direction and how the light direction can begin to express those things. Okay. Then the same here with the beard, right? Like you're doing too much highlighting and you're not focused enough on, like, the general shape of the beard, right? Like light and shadow of the beard. So it's like this part's dark. You're trying too hard to, like, draw lines, right? Highlight the sculpt, or, like, edge highlight the sculpt. Where what we want is we first want to create form, you know. I want to create that form of his face, you know, something like that. You know, even the mustache would have form here. It creates shadows and stuff. Okay. Something like that, right? Are face shadows generally brown tones? I mean, it depends, like, what kind of lighting you're going for. But I mean, generally skin is brown tones, so yes. You could do it in whatever tones. It just depends on what kind of ambience you want to go for. Okay, and then you can take this and, like, now start to add, like, some highlights to it, right? Then you can start to, like, push the little lines, but you still want to maintain the shapes, right? We want these, like, larger shapes. You know, maybe there's stray hairs here and there that, like, stick out. But we create much more drama and express the form much better. Okay? Does this make sense to you guys? You have a flashlight on your phone. Use it, okay? When you're messing with a model, like take your phone flashlight out. And like move it around the model and see what looks interesting. What silhouettes certain shapes well, right? Like what frames elements in an interesting way. Okay? Cool. Muy bien. Yeah, I mean, I feel like you were kind of starting to do that, but yeah, you gotta push that darker. Yeah, you can go darker than that. Don't you hit with the ballet? Ballet. Osways. Howdy, Eric. It's almost a year since I started my miniature painting journey, but lately I feel a bit flattened, like I'm doing no progress. Can you please give me your feedback on this piece and its current state? Also, can you point me how to progress? So, I mean, this is not bad. Okay. Oh, chill on the base, though. So, this is pretty good. Nice color composition, nice harmony. This is way too much. Too much color, too much, like, less is more, okay? But some of the stuff going on up here is not bad. It's pretty good. I've noticed with your NMM, so you have a tendency to create highlights that are a little too small. Those make sense on like cylinders. So here you have cylinders, you get some pretty thin highlights, but this isn't really a cylinder, for example. So this thin highlight right here doesn't really make sense. This highlight is also maybe a little small. So there's a bit of a tendency to do that. Like same with this stuff, like this is technically sort of a cylinder shape here, but you have that very small highlight, right? This little highlight here, but then it's like, you know, they're like really tiny. So don't be afraid sometimes when you're doing non-metallics to make some broader shapes, like brighter, okay? So what I mean is like here on the gold, for example, right? Like why not this whole upper section just be a little brighter, right? Could be a little brighter, a little bigger, you know? There's nothing wrong with that. His little pharaoh chin thing, like, let this be, you know, a bit bigger, right? Right? There's nothing wrong with some larger highlights in metal. You know, all this stuff is like, these tiny little highlights on flat surfaces make it very difficult to read flat surfaces. And this is why flat surfaces are the hardest thing to paint in metallics and non-metallics, because it's expected that like everything needs to be like, it needs to have maximum gradients on everything. Every little plane, right? Any object is made up of planes. Like this is made up of 4 planes and then this sort of sphere in the middle, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 planes, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, well, if I was going to paint this non-metallic, do I want white and black on this whole thing? Or do I want maybe this one just happens to catch the light way more, right? Because of the way it's facing, or maybe because your light seems to be coming in from this way based on the reflection here, that maybe this one would just be significantly brighter than the other ones. And then maybe this one would be more middle toned, and then maybe this one. And you could still put in gradients, right? I can put a gradient here, and I could put a gradient down here, right? Maybe a secondary gradient in there somewhere. But it can be generally just like darker. And then this one up here, you know, you could have go even brighter or something, right? So you don't have to go maximum contrast on everything. And then if this was non-metallic surface, that means that this spherical shape here would catch light like that, right? So simplifying these shapes, especially flat-sided shapes, will make for a more readable surface. Otherwise, when you try and put so much detail everywhere, it becomes very easy to like just become noise. Like for the ferrochin or this long thing, right? When you've got 7 different little reflections on here, you know, you start to lose the general form of this shape, right? Where if we simplify it a little bit, right? We simplify this, and then we can put like 1 bit of highlight like in it that's a little brighter, you know? Now these sides become much more clear, and it's about creating contrast between the light side and the internal shadow side, right? So sometimes less is more. You know, if I was doing these guys here, maybe I would extend this a little bit out. I would extend this out a little more, you know? Let the whole shape be a little bit bigger and create more contrast between the brighter side and the shadow side. You know, maybe this is the darkest this side goes. And then there's this dark inside edge, right? You know, and then the inside is a little darker. Right, you can add, you know, push some back in there, but creating clear separation between the 2 opposite planes will make the overall shape of that much make more sense. And then you get into like, you know, now once you start adding the edge highlights, right? Now you start pushing these edge highlights in here, it'll start making these things more defined and readable. You can add secondaries, but the secondary should never be as intense as the main light, right? So let's look at sort of the difference here. Like, can you see just how much more like the claw shape and stuff is readable, you know? So that's my big thing for you. is simplify a little bit, right? Don't try and push maximum contrast on every individual little detail and plane. Some things need to be more simplified so that where you do want detail, you can read that. Because I need to be able to read the overall shape of things. Okay? And tone down the base. There's just too much going on. It's going to be very distracting from the actual figure. Pick like, you know, one or two less colors. Right? If I was doing the this blade here, I might want this top one to be just brighter than the other one. Okay. J squared. Hi Eric, I've been working on the Steel Rook piece. I'm calling it gourd duty. Okay, makes sense because of dad jokes, because they're pumpkins. For a long while now, and I'm not sure it's wait. And it's for sure been a big stretch project for me. I'm pretty proud of where it's ended, but I would love your feedback to see where I can improve. Ooh, boy. I actually quite like the Rook. The actual Rook is quite nice. Pretty well done. Good figures, nice colors. The background is not so great. So what do we know about the background? What's the problem with the background, guys? Do you guys know? I'll give you a second. It's the darkness is okay. Because it's supposed to be, you know, he's supposed to be in sunset or something. I don't mind the darkness that much. What's the problem with the background? Oh, please, guys. No, the clouds aren't upside down. No, it's not the composition. What's wrong with the clouds? The light is not from below. The clouds are now above the sun if it's sunset. That's okay. That's not a problem. Please. Please, guys. Help me. What is the problem with the clouds? Yeah, they just stop. They just fit in a box. They're just like, oh, they're perfectly, the clouds fit right here. They're just, they don't break the edge. Okay? They stop at the top, they stop at the edge. They all just fit nicely into the backdrop. Like they're packed in, you know, like they're cotton balls packed into a box. Yeah? They need to break, okay? So, Also, cloud stack. So, okay, let me explain something to you guys about perspective. Okay? So, perspective. Here's the horizon line. Yep, we've got the horizon line in our image. Correct? Let me put it on another layer. Okay, this is the horizon line. Yes. This is the vanishing point. Things get smaller as they go towards the vanishing point. Well, everything above the horizon flips. So that means things get smaller as they get closer to the horizon. Okay? So, should the clouds at the bottom or the clouds at the top be the biggest? Which clouds are closer to you? The top clouds or the bottom clouds? The top clouds should be the bigger clouds because these clouds are moving into the background. They're moving towards the vanishing point. Okay? So, let's repaint some clouds. That means, all right, I'm going to make a layer on top real quick so I can not have to, I'm just going to do this so I can paint over the edge without fear of like having to clean it up afterwards. Yeah. All right. So, clouds are dark. We probably really shouldn't see much of the sky through the clouds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some like darker blue and just okay. Then we've got these like nice purpley colors and stuff. And that means that the clouds up here, which they're going to break the edge, all right? So as we paint the like light on the bottom of them, we can be a little fluffier with them, you know? So these clouds are closer to us. And then as we move down towards the horizon, these clouds are going to get further away. Okay, so they're going to get smaller. So as we move down, they're going to get smaller and smaller and smaller until they also are so small, and because of atmospheric distance, they're going to start to get less obvious, right? So we need smaller clouds that are further away. And the bigger clouds are going to have higher contrast and be fluffier and bigger because they're closer to us. And these ones will start to get closer as they layer and smaller. And we break the edge. And more defined, right? So we're dealing with the perspective, right? And yeah, don't let them, you can make them as sketchy or painty as you want. I'm not trying to render perfect clouds here in a couple minutes, but you should get the idea that as we move away, the clouds get smaller, right? Okay, so now something like this, right? So see the shape's getting smaller. Okay. Now, that's pretty good. But I think, just like we talked about earlier with the like sunset thing, okay, here's where we want to play with that, like that light as you get towards the as you get towards that edge, right? We want more of these like sort of orangey pinks, right? This is where we want some more of that nice orange colors as we start to transition to the shadows, because that's what's going to give us that like this golden hour kind of effect, right? So we get more orange as it starts to shift towards the lights. Yeah. As we get to that terminator and those transition points, we get more of these warm tones as it starts to shift. But we're trying to simulate that kind of golden hour kind of effect, you know? It could probably also mean like so that he's consistent with right? So that the lighting on him, because he's reflecting all this light, that might mean that we need more of these like golden yellows in the lights also, right? Because we're going for that like orange, that sort of pinky orange kind of sunset vibe, you know? So like let's get some of that yellow, like we're like really intense yellow and orange in here as we get closer to that central light, you know? Make sense? And then, yeah, you probably could actually just like darken the whole thing back here. Typically at sundown, you tend to have more of these like almost like purpley blues, like these dark bluish colors. So what I would do is I would just like, I would actually darken this down even more. Because the pink part of the sky is on the opposite side, you know? Make sense? Got it? Get it? Got it? Murph. Slightly updated pics, a few posts down. Hi Eric, more NMM practice. There's still some whip going on, but it's nearing the end. Looking for general feedback and what you think might need fixing. Hope didn't disappoint. So the joke there is that I told him if I have to correct the same things that I corrected on the last two of these that I looked at, I was going to be disappointed. Because we have looked at quite a few of these guys at this point. So hopefully he's not making the same mistakes. And based off the picture, I'm going to go with, no, the arm looks quite good. Okay. I quite like it. the metallic arm. The skin is a little gray. Could use some more color. The like didn't over highlight the shirt and stuff. So I think the arm looks really good. Yeah, shirt looks good. Arm looks pretty good. There's little tweaks here and there, but in general, I think it's quite nice. And the skin is okay. There is some problems with the skin, and I will point them out. But overall, I think the piece looks pretty nice. So, what do we think about the arm? So here's the good things you did, okay? Good things is that you did simplify. So there is, right? This is what we were talking about with flat surfaces before. He didn't try and create too much variation and contrast on every individual plane. So we get a better understanding and readability of the overall shapes, right? So there's more clear, like this plane is facing this way, this plane's facing this way, this one's facing this way, right? The pieces fit together better and we can understand more the general shape of the arm. Now, there's two little things, I think. This part of the arm, okay, this is very small. This one, I think you could lighten a little bit more just to create separation between this and the bicep. Yeah. Because his arm's like this, right? It's not like this where that would tuck under. Okay. So that's one tiny change. And then we can get a little fancy because it's metallics, right? Here, yeah, a couple of spots. I think you could edge highlight a little more. Push the contrast just a little bit further. But here's a spot to get fancy. Light is going to come in, hit his arm, and then where's it going to go? Right? So this part of his arm right here would probably reflect this part of his arm. Okay? And it would reflect that part of his arm from majority of angles. Somewhere it would reflect somewhere on this arm, right? So this is a spot where you can now play. This is where you might want to play with some secondary reflection that's like, oh, that's his arm reflecting like in his arm, you know? The metal reflects itself. And we can create a little more shape that way. Okay, so you can play with those kind of ideas. Right? But in general, I like it. You know, there's maybe a couple little spots where we could do super thin little highlights or something, but overall, I think it's quite good. So don't really have much to say about the metallics, right? Other than just maybe try and sharpen some points a little bit more. Like I see you're going white, but could probably stretch it just a little bit more in order to really push that contrast up some, you know, like this might be in just the right position to really catch some edges, right? Or maybe this is like, yeah, right there, and it's like that highlight really just stands out, you know? But overall, yep, good stuff, good stuff. Okay, so let's look at the difference. It's pretty subtle, but you can push it just a little bit further. Okay, now comes the issue of the body. All right. Where did we mess up? Where did it get away from you a little bit? Okay, his face is in shadow here. So that makes the assumption that the light is coming in slightly from the top right, you know? Just a bit. There's not a big cast shadow of his nose or anything, but clearly the left side of his nose and the left side, or our left, his right side of his face. Yeah. Okay. There's clearly a little bit more shadow there. Well, let's look at some other volumes, right? If this is getting shadowed, and that's curving away from the light source, right? That volume is curving this direction. If we were to draw his head as a box, like a three-dimensional box, right? Right, this cube goes back this direction. Okay. Makes sense. That means that anywhere here, right, there needs to be shadow that kind of matches the side here. So these shapes that are curving now away from the light, right? The chest does it, right? You did it here. This is curving away from the light. But the arm, even the hand, you did a little bit, but we could do it more, right? So the arm, you didn't really quite get the fact that some of this stuff is starting to curve away from the light. Thanks, Nim. Okay, so we need to take some of this, and that left side, this left side of him. Oh, crap! I painted over all the. Let me erase this. Okay, without erasing the metal I did. Okay, so that means that, yeah, the left side of his body needs to be more in shadow as this curves away from the light, you know? This is what I'm looking for. I'm looking for landmarks like this, right? So what I mean by landmarks is it's like the face can be treated as if we're using the face as a guide for sort of the general volume of light, I'm looking for anything that matches that angle. I feel like sometimes you guys I know exactly what happened. This is what happened painting this model. He painted the face square on. So looking directly at the face, right? He was like, I'm going to paint the face like this, right? Looking at it from the angle we're looking at it from. Okay? And then what happened is he went to paint the arm and the body, and what do you think he did? He spun the whole figure so that the shoulders were squared up to him. And he painted the chest, or the chest and the arm from a different direction than he painted the face from, right? I almost guarantee you that's exactly what happened. That you painted it in two different ways, okay? So we have to stay consistent here in order to not lose those, in order to not lose the look that we're going for, right? The directionality that we're aiming for. All right, so we make sure, and that means like these shadows don't really make sense. Like there really shouldn't be really any shadow in here because this stuff's getting hit by light. Now, the bicep maybe gets blocked by the chest or whatever, right? There could be stuff like that. But don't lose the general lighting direction, okay? Make sure it maintains with what you've done on the other parts, all right? Probably also meaning that we wouldn't see a whole lot of shadow in here. Right. So if we look at the difference now, the lighting is more consistent with that top right lighting that the face has, you know? This is why Zenithal helps. This is why a directional Zenithal will help you with this, because the Zenithal will help you keep track of what that direction is. Yeah? Cool? All right. Got two more? We got the whatever the heck this thing is. Is this a jackalope? Hell yeah, dude. Alright, first time submitting here. I'd really like some feedback on the overall readability, contrast, and how I can elevate this piece further. No, it's a jackalope, dude. You guys don't know jackalopes? I think it's pretty good. I like the pistols. I like mostly like the fur texture. The jackalope is like a cryptid. It's I guess it's not really a cryptid. It's like a fake animal. It's it's basically someone taxidermied a jackrabbit and with like antelope horns on it and called it a jackalope. Like they found it out in the desert. Well, a liger is a real thing too, though, isn't it? You can actually breed a tiger and a lion together. They can actually procreate like a donkey, but this is it's like a fake animal that someone taxidermied and then tried to and then it became like a myth that it actually existed. You'll see them in like Vegas and that sort of area. Texas and whatnot. A hyperstitious cryptid. There. But yeah, no, I like it. It's pretty good. I particularly like some of the elements like the subtle wood grain and stuff in the handles. Like this is nice. Um, Here's what I'll say. What one thing I would ask is like uh what is like the goal with this figure? Like what are you using him for? Because this is boring. I guess you posted a picture of the base, didn't you? Yeah, you did. Okay, the base could be better. One, I don't feel like the base, like you're using way too much white here on the base. I don't really get the sense of like the sort of color rocks that I would expect. I would expect like some more red rocks, some more orangey tones with this sort of desert, right? So what I would do is I would probably try and like mask the succulent and the cactus and maybe hit it with the airbrush if you got one just to like filter some color on top and get some more orange tones. And then that sort of stuff, like when you need to be thinking about what kind of base you're going to paint the figure on, because that allows you to do certain things that you maybe wouldn't have thought of otherwise, right? So if you're painting this guy, like now if I know that the base is going to be like orangish, right? It's going to have this like orangish tone to it. Maybe instead of just like gray, I start to do things like introduce other little reflections in the gun. Maybe we can introduce some of those like orangish tones in his shiny pistols. To give that sensation that these things are reflecting the ground, right? It's going to help integrate the figure a lot more into the base, right? We can even put some of those ground reflections like in the belt buckle and stuff. So in all these little silver buttons, you can get more of those ground reflections. And then you can play around with like, maybe it's a bluish day, or maybe not super blue, like, we want the deserty feeling. But, instead of like pure gray, maybe there's a little bit of this like bluish color reflecting in the gun and these like upper parts that reflect the sky, right? So we can introduce some more interesting color and help tie him into the scene just that little bit more, right? Doesn't change it very much, but it can create like a sense that he's more in the environment. Now, when it comes to the face, I feel like I'm losing some stuff here. I don't know what's going on with his teeth. I feel like there should be something a little more obvious there. Maybe it's just the figure. The eyes, I think, could be outlined a little better. So, like, try and really, like, I can't see where, like, the bottom eyelid is. So try and draw around these a little more. Create, like, create a little more sharpness here. There's just little things that you could do to increase the readability of certain elements. Like this is very pink, but then you don't really use that pink like in the nose. So little things like that. The other one is on the leather. So you got a lot of like the leather duster, the leather cap, the leather pistol holsters. Try and maybe change these up a little bit, so like maybe his pistol holsters are like a little bit more orangish than his coat is, so like just by changing these slightly more orange, right, we can create a slightly different leather material than it's his goatee. Okay. We can create a slightly different leather material than the jacket is, right? And then the hat is. And honestly, like, maybe it's just me, but I would think about possibly changing the hat. Can I see him from the side? It's a lot of brown, like maybe a black cap would look better, right? I like the Ace of Spades. Does he have the little, I can't see it in the picture. Does he have the little, like, trim around the hat? You know, the, whatever you call that, like on his cap. I'm thinking of, what is his name? You know, maybe even changing the coat to black could give him, oh, not you. You're normal. Not to black, but like a gray instead. Like we gray this out a little more, right? This can also help create like a slightly different color so it's not the same brown, right? We're just trying to create like a little bit of separation here and there where we can, you know? Anything we can do, like you have a nice black, like the belt is very black, right? So that's cool. Anything we can do to like, because the handles are brown and the duster is brown and the holsters are brown and the hat is brown, and it's like there's so much just brown. We can try and alter the browns through saturation or something. No, it's not the hat band. It's like the ribbon that goes around the hat. I was curious if it was red. Yeah, you could try like a black hat maybe, right? Feel like there's something that makes something feels a little more outlaw about a dude in a black hat. A black cowboy hat, you know? Feel even more gunslinger to me. Probably because I'm thinking of Clint Eastwood or something. Oh, yeah. Cool. Makes sense. Oh, he's supposed to be like Doc Holliday then, yeah. Yeah, I think a Doc Holliday who's got that. He's a little more finely dressed, you know, not the rancher kind of look, but the what's it called? The fancier looking. Cool. All right. Let's look at people real quick. Hey, Eric, I would love to know your judging on this and where it could improve. I went for a warm cast shadow with this, but I did highlight with a bit of blues at the very end. Also shaved out the feet to make it seem she's underwater. Also tried some stuff like the caustic effect on the dress. I like the cast shadow quite a bit. The clouds are pretty nice. They're maybe a little extreme to me, but for the time of day that I feel like she's kind of painted at, it feels a little odd to be so warm like that. And then not see that sort of effect elsewhere. But it's okay. Yeah, I mean the figure painting is quite good. There's a cow. So what I would say, I'm trying to think about framing, right? Yeah, there's a fish down here or something. Little fish right there. Yeah, he painted the toes. It's pretty cool. The framing of the model, right? So there is a bit of an issue with the cloud and the lighting direction. The light direction is very much like slightly top right, but the cloud is a little more, I guess, also maybe slightly top right, but it feels a little bit to the left. I don't know, or a little more lower. You don't normally see clouds in this. I think what's bothering me is you don't normally see clouds in this color when the sky, when the sun is high in the sky, right? You see these sorts of colors when the sun is getting lower in the sky. So I think that's what's kind of bothering me. I want to try something just out of curiosity and see what happens. Now, this is I'm not saying this is, you have to do this, but I just want to know for curiosity's sake. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to color all this in. Technically, it should be like even lighter blue like this, because normally when you get lower into the sky, the horizon tends to be a lighter blue. There's no way he's going to do this, but he's going to be like, you're crazy. I'm not changing the whole background like that. I feel like some of this could frame and silhouette a little better. All right. So, looking at this, all right. Well, let's zoom way out so it's like a thumbnail, right? Feel like she definitely stands off the background more. But if we did this, I feel like this feels much more natural to what I would expect the cloud to kind of look like. Than this. I'm not saying they're wrong, right? Like, so you're going for a certain thing. But this, like, this slightly lower level of contrast, this is atmospheric dispersion, by the way. Like, things in the distance tend to lose a bit of color because of, yeah, like dust in the atmosphere and all these other things and blah, blah, blah. The way just our atmosphere works. Yeah, I think lowering it down a little would feel more natural, but I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm saying for future reference, this might make more sense. Right? Now, ignoring that, you need more of this in the shadows, okay? Especially low on here. So I want more of this green to be reflecting in the lower parts of her dress. These are going to pick up, white picks up a lot of color, all right? So anything that is shadow near the water should pick up quite a bit of that green, right? Because the light is going to hit the water and bounce off and create some of that color back into the shadow. Now that doesn't mean up here, right? Because this is further away. But down here where you're close to the water, you can start to work in just a bit of that green tones. Okay. This is all pretty good. I don't have much to say about the hair and stuff. I like it. I like the hat. If you want to get super fancy, I can't tell if you did it, but what you can do, if you want to get a real fancy pantsy, you can put little dots of light here, because these straw hats will sometimes have did he do it? Did he put the light like underneath the hat? Good. Good job. Nice work. Yeah, the little holes in the hat will show some light through it, so that's cool. Now, I don't think you really need to do it on the face, honestly, because like the hair or whatever will get in the way, and it'll just create like some unwanted like freckles instead. So I don't think it's a very good idea. But it is good that you blurred the cast shadow a little here, so that's nice. Other things, I mean, basically is that like, yeah, I mean, I think, like I said, I think the figure itself is really good. Like really strong work overall. I think, yeah, the background I mostly like, and then it kind of, it feels like you had so many different directions you were going with this that I'm not sure it all works together, right? Exclamation point Discord. Yeah. You know what I mean? So I really like the figure. I like parts of the backdrop. Like, I like how you did the caustics. I like how you did the water. It's cool. The backdrop is cool. The cloud looks great. I just think all together. Oh, there I can see some of the light. Yeah, that's nice. I just think all together, like, that it doesn't all come together, right? But I don't have a lot to correct on the painting itself. I think your painting is quite nice. Yeah, the hat's really good. Yeah, really strong work. So, anyways, my point just being, I think if you're going to do another project like this, right? At some point, if you do another project, try and just like plan a little more up front, right? Like a little more thought into how the whole thing's going to come together, and then because I remember seeing the background from a while ago, probably well before you started the actual figure, right? So altogether, it'll create a more successful piece. Now, I want to talk about another thing of composition real quick. So what do you need to be changed to pull it all together? Just the color of the cloud? It's not just the color of the clouds. It's the framing of her. There's balance. There's some balance issues. Like for me, probably the background is wider than it needs to be, or she needs to be moved to the left, right? There's some things, like there were some decisions I know you guys talked about early, like why do the tracks curve? Like I don't quite understand some of the storytelling elements. Like what's the reason for the little house in the background? Why are there train tracks underwater? Like I don't, if there's symbolism here, I don't understand it, but like sometimes, you know, let me just this up. So let's do this again. Let's put this back. Right? If we tone this way back, I'm actually going to make another, I'm going to duplicate this real quick. I'm going to set this as a color layer. Or hue. It might feel better, compositionally speaking, if instead, so she's quite balanced, yeah. Like, let's look at the center line. Okay, center line is right here, where her feet are. But she is contraposed. Okay. So she is balanced off to one side, and then there's more visual weight. Everything visually weights to this side, right? Okay, other than this little island, but basically everything is trying to visually weight this side of the piece. So how do we counterbalance that? Well, we move her to the left, right? Or we move more of the piece to the left. So instead of maybe the sky being there, what if we did this? Or the edge being there. What if we cut it to like here? So now we visually center her a little bit more, right? I don't know. This is not like go change it, right? These are like future lessons to learn. This is how you learn and apply things to the future, right? So if we make this skinny, I prefer a bit skinnier scenes, anyways, just because I like the proportions to a figure. Right? So she visually weights much more to the left now. So if we look at like where the visual center of the piece is, right? Now the center is here. And she's off to the left, but she centers more like her weight, right? The volume of her is much more centered, right? So we push the line, right? The line through her head is now like in this sort of thirds, right? This where her kind of feet are. But her volumetric weight, if you will, her silhouette weight is much more balanced. Make sense? But the painting's good, man. It's good. It's good stuff. Yeah, I think something like even that would look quite nice. I'm trying to get it where I want it. Like what I would think that I would want the clouds to look like, but not every layer style is exactly right. Something like that, maybe. Anyways. It's cool, man. Good job. I like it. Just little takeaways for things in the future. Okay.